from the Trump administration that understand this reality, that realize that because we have been sleeping at the switch a little bit, China is moving at a pace that is alarming. And you're going to see leaders that understand this and that start putting the money to the capabilities and understanding that it's about the commercial capability of the American economy.
From the Defense and Aerospace Report, this is The Downlink, a podcast about the intersection of space, the space business, and defense. Not just what's over the horizon, but what's happening above it. I'm your host, Laura Winter. We have a new, well, actually kind of old administration coming in. Ever since Donald Trump was declared the winner of Tuesday's presidential election, a kind of giddiness has come over many a space power advocate. After all, it was Trump who reconstituted the National Space Council and then established the U.S. Space Force, which, by the way, will celebrate its 5th birthday next month. But for a little illustrative comparison and contrast between the outgoing and incoming administrations, under Trump's first term, the National Space Council met 8 times. Under the Biden administration, it's met just 3 times. The vice president convened that 3rd meeting last year in December. And in almost the 4 years since Joe Biden became president, there was no public effort to reverse Trump's space policy directives, and the Biden administration released more than a few of their own. But space power advocates have generally been disappointed and discontent with the current administration's funding priorities, and what they have seen is a lack of support and vision and ultimately a paucity of ambition. And the criticisms have covered both NASA and the U.S. Space Force, how they've been managed in a time of great power competition here on Earth, on orbit, on the moon, and beyond. Political fortunes changed this week, and in addition to Trump retaking the White House, the president-elect now, kind of owes some of his electoral success to the billionaire SpaceX founder Elon Musk. And Musk has made it clear to all that what he really wants is to colonize Mars. And he certainly has Trump's ear. This short clip of audio is from Trump's victory speech early Wednesday morning.
They're great. Everybody up here is great. Everybody up here is very special. But the Trump, who did you say? Oh, let me tell you, we have a new star. A star is born, Elon. Now he is. Now he's an amazing guy. We were sitting together tonight. You know, he spent 2 weeks in Philadelphia and different parts of Pennsylvania campaigning.
So just what should we expect? Broad strokes from the new administration. What will be its space goals and what should be the priorities for the president and a Congress that will need to be convinced to fund it? To discuss, we have the former chairman of the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee, now retired Representative Robert Walker, retired Air Force Lieutenant General Steve Kwast, and Todd Harrison of the American Enterprise Institute. Here's our conversation. Hey there, Todd. It's great to have you back on the podcast.
Hey, great to be back.
And welcome, Bob and Steve. It's a real honor to have you both join us for what is your first time on the Downlink podcast.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
Yeah, thank you for having us and allowing us to say a few things at this important juncture in history.
That is true. It has been quite a momentous week. So before we start to unpack how the national election results will impact space, U.S. national interest, and national security, let's first do a quick round of introductions. And Todd, as you have been on this podcast before, why don't you go first?
Oh, sure. Yes. I'm Todd Harrison. I'm a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, where I focus on space security, space policy, the defense budget, lots of other things.
Thanks. And Bob, you have done so much. You're the author of the first piece of commercial space legislation that became law. And that's when you represented Pennsylvania's 16th congressional district. You chaired the House Science Committee. And now that you're out of public service, you're still very much involved in space. So please take a moment and tell the audience what you're doing now.
Well, I'm the CEO of moonWalker Associates. We're a consulting firm that works primarily in the science, space, and technology arena. In the past, I have been the chairman of the Space Foundation. I have been a longtime member of the Aerospace Corporation, and I have chaired the Congress area in science, space, and technology. So my post-congressional career is pretty much hearkening back to my career in the Congress.
And last but certainly not least, Air Force Lieutenant General retired Steve Kwast. You're really well known amongst the space power advocates, but not everyone in space and defense knows you. Plus, the official Air Force biography doesn't really, highlight your space background. So please take a moment and introduce yourself.
Well, thank you. And it's funny how our lives prepare us for the moments we're in. And so, as I look back on being raised in a small tribe in Africa to becoming an Air Force officer, being an astronautical engineer out of the Air Force Academy, and being a champion for space for 33 years inside that bureaucracy as a fighter pilot and then as a commander. When I got out, I was able to use all of that to become the CEO of SpaceBilt, which is a company that is building what our nation needs, and that is the logistics infrastructure of space so that the economy can thrive. So I'm so grateful to be here and to take all of that wonderful experience inside government, inside international affairs and national security and diplomacy and apply it to a company that can provide this country what it needs.
Again, thank you, gentlemen, so much for joining me. Steve, I'd very much like to stay with you and have you kick off the first segment of this discussion, which I'd also like to invite Bob and Todd to jump in on in a minute. But Steve, what I want to get at starts with a simple question that doesn't really have simple answers. And that is, we're all expecting that space security, and the Space Force will receive a lot more attention over the course of the next 4 years. It's been somewhat of an open secret that the Biden administration felt at the beginning of their administration, at least, that the creation of the Space Force was an unwelcome development. So what's going to be different under the Trump administration, and what do you think should be its top priority? Steve?
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And things will be different because President Trump understands that space is going to be the economic high ground upon which great power competition will play out. Put another way, the space economy will be larger than air, land, and sea combined because of the nature of space and how it can deliver information, energy, and resources to all people on the planet without infrastructure on the surface. So because of this understanding of how technology changes fate, the invention of the technologies that allow us to do things from space to benefit the human race and uplift the human condition are profound. And so you're going to see leaders coming in from the Trump administration that understand this reality, that realize that because we have been sleeping at the switch a little bit, China is moving at a pace that is alarming. And you're going to see leaders that understand this and that start putting the money to the capabilities and understanding that it's about the commercial capability of the American economy to be the leader in the space economy. And then downstream from that is the national security benefit. So that's what you're going to see: aggressive leadership, taking bold action and putting money where their mouth is to build the capability for the American manufacturing and logistics infrastructure of a space economy.
And what do you think should be the priority, though? I mean, if you had to choose like a top priority for space and defense, what would you choose, Steve?
Well, yeah, I would choose the foundation of competitive advantage in the commercial sector, and there, three big ones. And Elon Musk has already broken the glass ceiling on one of them. And that is transportation to space. So Elon Musk has lowered the cost of access to space by magnitudes. Now we need the government to help put their thumb on the scale to help companies like SpaceBilt that builds infrastructure and other companies. There's many of them out there to start building reusable satellites and spacecraft that can be assembled in space and help with a launch cadence that really starts accentuating the marketplace for people to get into space and build this capability. So that's where they need to lean on is transportation, communication, computing in space, and then the ability to build and operate in space. Action, meaning robotics or human, communication, energy delivery, and then transportation.
And Todd, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it is going to be an interesting shift in gears with the Trump administration coming back in. I think it's fair to characterize the Biden administration as ambivalent about a lot of space issues, and had a distinct lack of interest in space issues at the start of the administration. I think that evolved throughout Biden's term. And I think especially within DOD, the Space Force became much more accepted, and there was much greater realization of the priority that the military needed to place on space and keeping pace with countries like China and what they were doing. I don't think that there was a lot of interest placed on other space policy issues, with the exception of the direct ascent ASAP moratorium. The National Space Council did not appear to be a priority for the outgoing vice president. And I think we're going to see the Trump administration kind of come back in and pick up where they left off, which is at least at the White House level, placing a greater emphasis on space all around, commercial, civil, and military space. I think we ought to put our seatbelts on because there's probably going to be a lot more activity coming in this area.
And Bob?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that President Trump is going to be a very big player in all of this. And the fact that he has become so close to Elon Musk during this campaign can only augur well for the emphasis that will be placed on space. I think that there's a growing recognition, and this administration will be a part of some change here. NASA organizes itself very much in the same way that it organized itself back in the 1960s. That is simply an outmoded concept at this point, and it's resulting in programs that are massively behind schedule and massively over cost. Elon and Jeff Bezos and others have already shown that there are other ways of approaching the things that we need to do in space, and that we need to expand the horizons in space. It's been a concern that Space Force has largely been limited to looking down rather than looking out into space and going into cislunar. Its leadership understands that there's a need for that. And I think what we'll see now under President Trump will be some real action and real enthusiasm. For example, I think that the Space Council will be activated in a major way. And it's been a shame that it's been allowed to atrophy during the Biden administration, but it can be a potential source of the kinds of reformative change that's needed in the entire space community.
So we know that change requires taxpayer money, and Congress holds the purse strings. So back to you, Bob, because this is squarely in your lane, and I'm sure, Todd, you will want to jump in here. But we're operating under continuing resolutions, and that puts a real dent in the Space Force's ability to evolve at speed and take advantage of the rapid developments that could be available with capital support from the commercial sector. We're likely not going to have a budget before spring, possibly after the new presidential budget request from the new administration. What does Congress need to focus on? What programs would you tell, your former colleagues, what do they need to prioritize? Bob?
Well, in my view, one of the first things they need to prioritize is some restructuring of NASA. There are centers that need to be closed. There are programs that need to be totally revamped. So that is the place where there's certainly a need for some change. The problem is that the Senate is now going to have the ability, I think, to move President Trump's agenda. But it appears as though the House is going to be a very narrow majority, probably for the Republicans. And having been a member of leadership for part of the time that I was there, it was very difficult to get programs through Congress that is so evenly divided that a handful of people in your own majority can throw things off track overnight.
And if some of those places, locations, NASA locations, out there that you say that you think should be closed, I mean, I'd imagine there'd be a pretty big fight over that too, no? Because that's jobs.
No doubt about it. I mean, that's one of the problems that they'll face in all of this. But in the effort to consolidate programs and make them more viable, there's space facilities that do need to be consolidated into others. It's just a case that they're going to have to work that out. But there's no doubt that when they make that decision, there are a number of members of Congress who are going to rise up and say, oh, no, you can't move this center out of our district.
Todd, you are the budget guru for basically all of us here in Washington, D.C. when it comes to space. What would you prioritize? What do you think the Trump administration should go to Congress for, and how should Congress react, and should they do it?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll completely agree with what Robert just said, that it's really up to Congress, and it really comes down to the narrow majority in the House. And I worry if it continues to be a narrow Republican majority, that the Freedom Caucus will continue to take the defense budget hostage and use that as leverage and as part of an effort to cut overall government spending. And it also affects NASA funding as well on the non-defense side of the discretionary budget. And that is what is holding back both the Space Force and NASA in terms of going faster and innovating and taking on new missions. It's funding at the end of the day, and it's the budget caps that the Freedom Caucus insisted on that are holding us back in FY25. And if those caps get extended in the future, it's going to be the same scenario playing out year after year. That could thwart a lot of what the Trump administration wants to accomplish when it comes to space. So I'd say number one is they've got to figure out a way to work with or work around the Freedom Caucus and the fiscal hawks that, with a slim Republican majority in the House, two or three of those folks can gum up the works when it comes to getting legislation through an appropriations bill. So, number one, I think that's where the focus of the administration is going to have to be if they want to accomplish anything that requires funding, and almost everything does. Now, in terms of where to put that money in the Space Force, I think it's about growing mission areas. And as General Kwast referred to earlier, it's not just the Space Force job is not just looking down anymore. It's not just providing support and enabling services to warfighters on the ground. It's increasingly about looking around in space and affecting what other countries are able to do in space. And so, where I would put a focus on money is number one, things like bodyguard satellites, offensive counter space capabilities, space-based defense capabilities that can, both protect our satellites more effectively, but also can deny the benefits of space to others who would try to use space enabling systems against us. Um, Another big area that needs funding, and I think it needs the White House to step in and break the logjam, is this issue of tactical space-based ISR, where the Space Force is trying to move into new mission areas that used to belong to the Air Force. We used to do from an aircraft, and now we got to do it from space because of air defenses, and like ground moving target indication. And the NRO keeps butting heads with them and saying, no, space-based surveillance, that's our job. I think the Trump administration needs to come in and say, hey, you know what? You can both do it and you can compete. And we'll see who the COCOMs like better. Let's give them some options. That's what we do in all other domains. The Air Force is not the only service that has aircraft. So I think we need some healthy competition there between the NRO and the Space Force to deliver the capabilities the warfighter needs, but does not have today. All of that, though, takes more funding. And the only way that's going to happen is if we can get rid of these budget caps and actually have real growth in the overall defense budget.
And Steve,
Yeah, so let me add to that a little bit, because I agree with their assessment about the risk that we are observing, especially with the narrow margin in the House. But what is interesting, so from my perspective as the CEO of a private company and a person that's lived the life of national security, there is a way around it as we deal with the political realities, and that is that the basic infrastructure that is required for everything the Space Force and NASA needs to do that Todd and Bob were talking about require infrastructure. And the investors that I'm talking to around the world are ready to put their literally billions of dollars to work in the space sector because they see the business case now that launch costs are lower and the technology is there to lower the cost of a satellite and its fully burdened life cycle cost. And so there is a beautiful reality that all national security is downstream of the economics, and the private sector is ready to fund these companies, and all they need just is a little support from DoD, even if it's just in the name of the word that we need this logistics. And you can, it's amazing what these private companies can do because we can move fast. We are not burdened by the large bureaucracies or the politics. And the money is there in the private sector because the business case is there. And then when you have this foundation of logistics, now the Space Force and NASA and NRO and all of them can take advantage of that to do exactly what Todd said, and that is get the spirit of competition inside the government so we have more. There's a great saying out there in the military that you've all probably heard, but it really does apply here. Amateurs talk about weapons and tactics and shiny objects. But professionals talk about logistics. And if America can build on the commercial sector a logistics laydown of transportation, communication, supercomputing, and the ability to be able to deliver energy in the cislunar economy, we will be able to deal with any unexpected event in time to help save the American economy and our national security needs. So that's why, as we go forward, the ability for the private sector to truly be supported. And so my point to Congress would be help us with the regulatory environment and the statutory environment to be able to allow innovation to happen and to allow American companies to move fast. That's about as hard as what Bob and Todd were talking about, but that is the key for these private companies.
I'd like to follow up though on this a bit to see rather if there is a role for Congress to play a bit more on the financial side, if there is something prescriptive or if there's something that needs to be said to the incoming leadership of the Department of Defense. But in a recent Aerospace Corporation report, they revealed that since 2021, new venture capital money as a new venture capitalist cash has actually decreased by about 50%. And there just is less new cash out there. And there are some young companies that are struggling, even though they some of them do have defense contracts, but some of them are, well, running out of cash, right? And I'm just wondering if there are other levers, other ways to sustain these technologies that the Department of Defense, and more specifically the Space Force, but probably, the Space Development Agency, the NRO, et cetera, that they want. But this is something that I have been hearing, I would say, really over the past 6 months, that venture capitalists are, they're kind of sitting on the fence at the moment and need to see more. Is there, what could be done?
Yeah, I would jump in and say, first of all, recognize that those capital markets, they fluctuate a lot around inflation levels, right? And so back in 2020, 2021, inflation was really low. The money was flowing freely. The space, sector was really hot. Lots of money flowing in there.
Interest rates were lower as well, right?
Exactly.
We've got it,
And,
now we've got an inverted yield curve, which
yeah,
is
and
kind of
so
scary.
And so now that we've seen, inflation and then, of course, interest rates start to come back down, we should see capital starting to flow more again. Things really tightened up because of what happened, with inflation and interest rates. That should start to ease. But also, we got to take into account that a lot of that capital that flowed into space companies, it is invested. And those, venture capital firms, if it's succeeding, they're going to need to make an exit, get that money out, and then they can reinvest it in something else. And there are a number of companies, though, these are ventures. There's a reason they're called that. Many of them are going to fail. And that's part of the normal business cycle. That's going to happen. And, in a macro sense, that is a good thing. It cleanses the market. That the strongest, the fittest, succeed. Weak, the less competitive companies, they will fail, they will go away, and then money can be allocated more towards the succeeding companies. But from a government perspective, I think we largely need to get out of the way of that and let these market forces take their course. And really, what these companies need is not government investment. They need a government customer. They need a reliable buyer. If it's something that's of benefit to the government. So if it's a capability like, space-based radar or space-based signals intelligence, that is being provided as a commercial service, if that's actually, good immediate use for the military, which I think in many cases it is, then we just need a budget line and contracts and, stability in the government buying that as a commercial service. We've seen this with space situational awareness. The Space Force was forced into buying SSA services, commercial services. They've been buying it on month-to-month contracts. That's like the worst possible way you can buy from industry. You're giving them no stability, no foresight into what their revenues are going to be. We're starting to move out of the month-to-month contract, but why did we ever get there in the first place? I think that we've got to, on the government side, we've got to be a better customer to the commercial space industry so that these market forces can happen and the good companies can succeed, the bad ones can fade away.
Back in the days when I was writing some of the early commercial space legislation, we also had a concept of tax-free products from space. That would bypass the yearly hassle over who gets what out of the federal budget. As long as you're in a position of having to go to the Hill with your bucket out asking for money, it's always going to be up to the political whims of the people who are there. If what you could do is establish that products produced in outer space would be tax-free, that would in fact give investors a reason to begin to fund projects, and it would also keep the price of the products being produced in space at a more reasonable level.
And ostensibly that would support, the need for infrastructure, right?
Right.
And
Well, Well, what you'd get is more infrastructure, but you'd also get it through investment rather than through government doing the projects. So you get it two ways. You get investment in space, but you also are assured that the products are widely distributed, widely used, and you get the benefit for of economic growth out of that.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. So that's a zero G, zero tax idea is powerful. And it's the kind of thing I think that President Trump might just be able to grab onto, like he did the idea of a space force as a wedge in history to protect our country. But I will tell you, as a CEO of a private space company, sitting down with the billionaires all over the world, this trend you talked about of less money and less investment, for two reasons. Everything Todd said, I agree with there. But as I talk to these billionaires, one, the economy was in a good place when they were investing, but there was a sense of enthusiasm that was probably overstated, and so some of them lost their shirts. And so there's two things that are coming back. One, the money is there. They are going to come back in and play. They're going to do more diligence than they did in the past because there were enough companies that got burned or VCs that got burned. So this is a good thing because, again, like Todd said, the free market is our superpower. And that free market does not pick winners and losers. We allow the business case and the revenue and the usefulness, whether the widget they're building is useful and novel. And that is a beautiful thing. So it will swing back like it always does because the Trump economics is going to make the conditions open their wallet. And that's what the billionaires are saying. And they're looking for the companies that they want to bet on.
And just sort of switching gears here a little bit, let's talk a little bit about NASA, right? Because under the Biden administration, all of the major Artemis missions have been moved to the right in terms of schedule, right? Since Jim Bridenstine left the agency. And the Artemis program is key to great power competition in the cislunar region. But we have witnessed that the agency's budget has shrunk along with, well, let's say it, its ambition. Todd, what do you expect from the Trump administration for NASA, and what should be the priority for NASA?
Well, it was President Trump that refocused NASA on putting Americans back on the moon, starting the Artemis program and the Artemis Accords that brings in partner nations from all around the world.
And the Accords have been wildly successful, actually.
They have. And I mean, give a lot of credit there to former NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine for putting that together and getting that going. And give credit to the current team at NASA for continuing it and expanding it. I think what, President Trump is going to come in and he's going to look at NASA and the program to go to the moon. And I think he's going to see it as a personal point of pride to have the next Americans walking on the moon during his second term, not after. So I think he is going to really focus attention on that program, keeping it on schedule so it doesn't continue to slip, additional funding where needed. Now, the other thing I think might happen, there's a decent chance will happen, especially with Elon Musk whispering in his ear as a confidant and advisor. I think we could see a concerted effort to put humans on Mars, not in the 2030s, but, in the near term, and start launching missions to prepare for that as those, Mars transfer opportunities become available. I could definitely see Musk pushing for that and, Trump buying into that and steering NASA in that direction without detracting anything from the moon landing, that's already planned.
Go ahead, you first.
I was just going to say the windows to launch to Mars are 2026 and 2028. And it has definitely been a big part of Trump's speeches. So, Steve, I think it really would help the audience to understand, though, what is the geostrategic value of the Artemis missions, right? We're supposed to go to the moon, not just to go and plant the flag, not just to go and touch down and come home, but eventually to stay there. And now we have this real push to also go to Mars, thanks to Elon Musk and his partnership, if you can call it that, with Donald Trump. I mean, what's the geostrategic value for that?
Yeah. So when you study history and civilizations and the ones that have perpetual success, or at least for a certain amount of time, they are the ones that invest in an economy that gives them a logistics advantage. So even a small country like Spain or Portugal or England can dominate the global economy because they invested in shipbuilding and deep sea navigation. Now, space is the same thing. The space economy is going to be massive. China can see it, and they are grasping for that high ground. It is, and so the geopolitical play here for Artemis or going to Mars is building the logistics, investing in the logistics. And in this case, back in the day, it was deep sea navigation and shipbuilding industry within these countries of Spain, Portugal, and England, and they dominated the global economy. The civilization that will dominate the global economy will be the first country that invests in the logistics of transportation, communication, energy delivery, and computation in space. And that's why I started this company, is to build that geopolitical foundation. So whether Artemis goes or Mars goes, the American people need to make sure that we hold the government accountable to build the logistics to do that. So it's not a one-trick pony. It's not about putting a person on the moon. That's the one that's the headline for the New York Times. The real headline for history and the geopolitical power to defend America's economy, our values, and our culture is building the logistics infrastructure to do it 1,000 times and do it affordably and do it cheaper and better than our competition.
Steve is absolutely right on that. And speaking from the standpoint of being a politician, it's what the politicians don't like to invest in. There's no fancy outcome that they can point to as the success story of what they're doing. It's the regular types of energy being expended that gets you to where you're going, gets the products back, and all of that. All those logistics are absolutely essential, and building that is what gives you leadership. But it's very hard to get politicians to understand that and to do it.
But this is what Trump's doing. I mean, you have the Artemis or Mars, but then under the surface, you're doing the logistics. So you have both. You have the sexy thing that Congress can get behind, and you have the real geopolitical thing, the logistics.
But I think also Trump has another, should I say it, sexy, fiery energy ball of energy, and that is Elon Musk himself, and that is SpaceX. I mean, you look at the launches, you look at what they just did. They caught the reentry. I mean, there are some pretty amazing things, and so I've got to wonder. I mean, President-elect was really specific, right, in his praise of Musk in his acceptance speech. Musk has sunk a lot of his money into campaigning on behalf of the incoming administration. So I've got to wonder, what's going to be the Musk effect, right? And what will Musk actually want in return? Will he get it? And what is he expected to even provide to the administration? Maybe it's that energy that will push politicians along.
I mean, I would jump in here and say I think that there are a couple of things that Musk would want for SpaceX. One is a NASA commitment to go to Mars. And not necessarily like a sole source contract or anything to SpaceX, but SpaceX would clearly be one of the prime companies that can help NASA execute on that mission. And honestly, SpaceX is not going to be able to go to Mars without the help of NASA. But number two, and much more immediate, I think SpaceX wants some relief from the or at least acceleration of the FAA launch licensing process. They have been repeatedly stymied and delayed getting launch licenses to test Starship down in Boca Chica, Texas. Some of that is related to EPA and environmental reviews. Some of it's related to FAA and the Office of Commercial Space Transportation. There's just not enough staff in that office, quite frankly. So I think that's something that the Trump administration could put resources to fairly quickly to help speed that up. That would benefit SpaceX. It would also benefit other space launch companies as well. Um, but I think that those are the things that Musk is, probably going to be asking for more directly.
And can Musk provide that energy though that Bob was talking about? That thing that, constituents could be excited enough to get behind?
Well, he can, except he has made himself into a very much partisan political figure now. And so anything he does is going to turn off half the country. Remember, this is a very close, divided election and electorate. And he has put himself squarely on the MAGA side, not just of partisan politics, but even within the Republican Party, he is turning off some people. So yeah, I there's a reason that defense company executives, they may have their own partisan political beliefs. They may talk and meet the people and even make campaign contributions, but they don't come out on stage with presidential candidates and campaign for them. There's a reason they don't do that. It's because they're going to have interests that extend beyond this administration. And I think Musk may have been a little short-sighted and a little naive about weighing into partisan politics in the way he did. And this could have some serious backlash. The other thing to keep in mind is some of the stories that have come out, if they are true, I don't know if they're true, but Musk allegedly having direct contacts with senior figures in foreign governments, including Russia and Putin himself. There could be legal ramifications from that, but certainly there are security concerns that raises that could land him in hot water and have an effect on SpaceX as well.
I mean, there have been photographs of him meeting with high-level politicians or high-level leaders, in mainland China, in Beijing. Bob?
Just as a sidebar to this whole discussion, everywhere I've been with Trump here recently, one of the things he's talked about in the speeches is the capture of the first stage of Trump's recent launch. So, I mean, that's just excited the president to the point that he mentions it every time he speaks.
Nope, it was in his acceptance speech or in his victory speech the other evening or
Right.
morning, rather, how should I say, right?
Right.
So next, let's tackle something that's a bit funky, and that is rumors. I don't really like tackling rumors, but rumor has it that Mike Pompeo might be the next Secretary of Defense. Not surprising. But I was surprised to hear that the Space Force CSO, and that's General Chance Saltzman, that he may be sacked. And I understand that at that level, everyone serves at the pleasure of the president. But really, should branch chiefs be replaced? And I need to ask that really of you, Steve.
Yeah. So what I will say, having lived the dream, of being a commander at the highest level in the Air Force, is that they are in a straitjacket in many ways. I mean, this is a good thing, meaning they serve the political authorities. And that's the way it should be. They serve at the pleasure. The American people vote in the political appointees or the president. The president sets up the political appointees, and the military needs to be obedient to those policies and those programs that are enacted to do all the things we're talking about. So and so it really comes down to one, having empathy for the fact that if General Saltzman was not able to do everything that people who understand the power of space, if he hasn't been able to do everything that they want him to do, it's probably not his fault. He is blocked at every turn, and Bob can talk about that. I ran into that. I was trying to reinvent the way we did pilot training for all, Air Force 690,000 people, but all pilots. We still trained them like we did in the 50s. And the only way I was able to get away with it is I knew my legal authorities and responsibilities. I had to carve out a budget and I had to hide it away from the Air Force because the Air Force leadership thought that I was changing something they thought was perfect. So we just need to be careful not to buy into the rumors, like you said, and two, just let's wait and see. And that Saltzman is literally doing what he's told, and he does not have a lot of latitude to go out. And that's because the administration was lukewarm on space. The National Space Council was essentially non existent, and he was constrained. He was told to look down, like Bob said, and not look up and out. So I just say that we should take, count to 10 before we make any judgments or even think that something will happen there.
And I'm really actually personally heartened to hear that, just because I do think that General Saltzman has actually accomplished quite a bit, and has definitely at least laid the groundwork that's necessary for looking up and out, and for taking Space Force out from being a brown water minded branch into something that does think much more in the blue water stance than how it had been under General Raymond. And General Raymond had different constraints. I mean, he was just starting this thing out. So anybody else on this?
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, but I think it was Saltzman who made the speech where he said that the Space Force needed to be far more active in cislunar, and also suggested that they could get the human station done on the moon by 2030. And that had to ruffle some feathers.
Yeah, that's correct.
Well, one thing I would add is, I would say first, Laura, I have not personally heard that rumor, so I can't confirm it. But I would say this, that if the new administration is considering changing him, I would caution and say, hey, maybe try empowering him before you replace him. Yeah. To General Kwast's point, he hasn't had a lot of latitude to run free. He hasn't had funding. He hasn't had the budget to pursue some of these new mission areas. Try empowering him and see what he's capable of before you even think about replacing him. And the other point I would make more broadly is, if this was part of changing over all the service chiefs with the new administration, that sets a terrible precedent. Yeah. And we should all remember that, the service chiefs and every military officer, their allegiance is first and foremost to the Constitution, not to the president, not even to the American people. It is first and foremost to the Constitution. That is what they follow. And that is the loyalty, the only standard of loyalty that we should hold them to.
Yeah, that's a great point, Todd. And the one last thing I'll say on that, Laura, is that I know General Saltzman very well because he and I essentially grew up together. When I was a commander of a major command, he was one of the one-stars working in the Pentagon. He is one of the smartest and most strategic minds about what space is all about and what it can mean for our economy and our future. So to Todd's point, if you let him free, if you allow him, he's got the mind to really make that happen. So I hope that they don't get into this. Get a Secretary of Defense that's willing to let him run. Get a National Space Council that's allowing the whole of government to support, and we can do great things. And he's a leader that will take it to the next level.
And finally, as we are sadly coming to the end of our time, but I really want to hear this from you guys. And maybe you can, do this in, let's say, maybe 15 words or less. And all of you are, accustomed to giving advice. What would be your best advice for space and defense to the incoming administration? It's about a sentence long. And Todd, why don't you go first?
I mean, I could sum it up in 2 words. I'd say lean in. That, we shouldn't shy away from the challenges that we face. We just need to resource the problem according to the threat. I would say that on the space, on the military side of space, as well as on the civil side of space, that we need more resources for what, we can do and what we should be doing as a nation.
Bob?
I would say that we needed to reform a lot of the things that we have been doing so that we can be vastly more aggressive in the future.
And Steve, I've left the last one for you because I want you to close out this episode.
It's an important question. And in my experience, for Trump to pick leaders that have no fear and understand what is at stake is key. If those leaders are afraid of the bureaucracy, if they're afraid of being shunned or alienated or ostracized because they're doing something unpopular, if they can't stand up to the bureaucracy, they shouldn't be in there. Aggressive, smart, prudent leaders that have no fear. That's what he needs. And then all these other things will start happening.
Steve, Todd, Bob, thank you all so much for making the time to come on the podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
That's it for this week. For your daily dose of award-winning defense coverage, listen to the Defense and Aerospace Report with Vago Muradian. And for the maritime domain, listen to Cavas Ships with Chris Cavas and Chris Cervello. And get your air domain news and analysis from the Air Power Podcast with JJ Gertler and Vago Muradian. I'm Laura Winter. Thank you for listening.